Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti. I am MrPhotographer.com. In this episode, we're going to look at another 20 images from the Process My Photo exercise we've been doing. Now, these are the last 20 images I happen to have. So, if you didn't see your image in episode 1A, B, C, D, or this episode, that means I either didn't receive your image or more likely, I lost your image. So I will ask you to send it to me again. We have till tomorrow, Saturday, to get me your image. And then I'll have it in the next episode of Process My Photo. Now, come Sunday, I'm going to be issuing a new image for us to do, and we're going to start anew next week. Now, as far as this week, I mentioned there's 20 images, and they're all pretty similar to the previous episodes in that there's a lot of variation. A lot of people interpreted this scene very differently. And this first image is from Jim Livingston. Jim says he did everything in Lightroom. He did use some brush and radial filters to do some local adjustments to warm up the sky and the reflections a little bit. And that's really well done, Jim. This next image is from Fred Church. Fred says he just saw sunrise, sunset as soon as he did this, and he has a preset for Lightroom that he uses for sunrise and sunsets, and he applied that preset. Then he did some basic panel tweaking to that preset. He added two graduated filters, one to the top and bottom to darken it a little bit. He burnt the upright post. He added a radial filter to the center and warmed that up a little bit. He reduced the overall exposure, then added another graduated filter to the bottom left to darken that. Added a vignette, added some blue saturation, then sharpened it and cropped it, and there is his result. Very cool. This next image is from Donald Goudy, and Donald gave me a little pronunciation key for his name. Thank you, Donald. And Donald used Lightroom to process the image. He hit the auto function in the basic panel, then added clarity, dehaze, and sharpening to bring out details in the clouds and the foreground grass. Used a radial filter to emphasize the morning light and added some contrast and darkened the clouds in front of the sunrise. Finally, he cropped the image to make the sunrise the focal point and cropped it so that the kind of three posts that are remaining in the snow kind of lead your eye to it. And he did a good job. Whenever you have something coming out from a corner, it's called a diagonal line, like the snow, that will often give a visual clue to the viewer of your image. It helps lead them through the image. And this is very well done on Donald's part. Next image is from Ron Richardson. He used On1 Photo Raw 2019 for this image. First, he cropped the photo. Then he added a portrait LUTs filter called Cowboy to get it to black and white. And just a real quick plug, on my marketplace, all my LUTs are now in one spot, so they're easier to find, and I made them all donationware, so just pay what you could afford. I'll have a link to that in the description below this video. He used layers and masks to reflect the gradient, messed around till he could combine both the black and white and colored water. And he said the brown shows through on the bottom shore. It's almost natural for a winter day. I agree. And he added a touch of blur. So very nicely done, Ron. This next image is from Norman Bushelil. He used Adobe Camera Raw. He did basic adjustments for white balance, contrast, whites, blacks, clarity, vibrance. He did local adjustments for the sky and the grass. He added some detail, did lens corrections, and added a vignette. Very nicely done, Normand. This next image is from Alan Nye. Everything was done in Photoshop. He processed the sky in Adobe Camera Raw using dehaze and clarity to increase the dramatic effect. Processed the foreground in Camera Raw to increase the shadows and exposure. Then he used a curves adjustment to add contrast and a little bit of blue in the shadows. Then he used a gradient adjustment layer to add the sun effect coming through the clouds. And he added a blend if command to that to protect the clouds and layer style options. Those of you that are familiar with Photoshop understand what blend if is. It's a little drop down there in the control for what he was doing. And finally, he removed some color using a vibrance adjustment layer. Very well done. And it's really not a drop down. It's hard to explain what it is. But trust me, He did a great job. Very nicely done, Alan. This next image is from Wasim Obeah. He didn't write what he did except that he used Luminar 3 for it. And that's very nicely done, Wasim. Thank you. This next image is from Martin Walders. Let's see. He didn't write what he did to the image either, but there's Martin's rendition of the scene. Very neat. This next image is from Ivan McGuire. Let's see. I think he used Lightroom for this. He didn't really say, but he did lens calibration, dropped the highlights slightly, did his black and white points, changed the luminance of the yellow, orange, and blue, then made the whole thing black and white. A couple of radial filters, softened the brightness on the horizon in a couple places, and then a slight vignette. It's very cool. Very nice dramatic black and white. This next image is from Elena Axon. Process the photo entirely in Lightroom, decrease the highlights and increase the shadows, played with whites and blacks and increased the clarity, did a strong contrast in the tone curve, played with the saturation of the blues and the luminance of the orange and yellows, put a graduated filter on the grass and a radial filter to enhance the oranges where the sun is, and finally exposed a little bit of the rocks and added a vignette. So yeah, very, very cool. Very nicely done. This next one is from Debbie MacIntyre. I use Luminar Flex. By the way, I just did a video on Luminar Flex, my first one yesterday. You could check that out. Kind of introduced what Luminar Flex is and processed an image in it. Let's see. Cold and a winter look. Yeah, definitely. Did raw develop filter, tone, HSL, golden hour just to brighten it a bit, and dodged and burn in a couple spots. And that is pretty cool. Very nicely done, Debbie. This next image is from Ave Carlson. Let's see. Lightroom Classic CC, mostly saturation shifts since Ove likes it gloomy. Some brush contrast in the clouds and some additional whites where light shines through. And just a hint of a vignette. Very cool. Very nicely done. This next one is from Kent Miller. Used an application I've heard of but never used. It's, I think, a Windows-only application. It's called Zoner Photo Studio. White balance, cloudy. So he changed the white balance to cloudy, adjusted the contrast shadows, white point and dehazed, straightened it, and cropped it to 4:3. Transferred it to On One Photo Raw 2019, added the green velvet film filter, and a vignette. Very cool. This one is from Peter Pakodi. I hope that's right, Pete. Used Photoshop Elements 15 and Elements Raw, then the Nik Collection Color Effects Pro 4, then Exposure X4, where he applied his own LUT, blended with grad filters, and reduced exposure levels to the original image. And that's it. Pretty cool. Very nicely done. This next one is from Keira Baxter. Let's see. And Keira gave me a little pronunciation key too. Thank you. Let's see. Did Lightroom for everything. Did lens corrections. Cropped it and straightened it. Cropped it to 16:9 and straightened it. Used the auto feature in the transform module. It switched it to the Adobe landscape profile and set the white balance using a neutral point in the sky. She used the eyedropper then. Decreased the highlights to -100, increased the shadows to +100, auto-adjusted the whites and blacks, then increased clarity to +30, dehaze and vibrance to +6. In the tone curve panel, adjusted the blue and red point curves. Blue channels slightly decreased and highlights increased. Blue channel shadows slightly decreased and highlights increased. Red channel decreased highlights slightly. Went back to the basic panel, readjusted the whites and blacks to make sure nothing was clipping, increased contrast to +17, sharpened it, added noise reduction, put a graduated filter on the sky, slightly increased the temperature and tint, decreased exposure, increased contrast, decreased highlights, brought up shadows, slightly increased whites and blacks, and so on. Just some more, tone adjustments with that graduated filter. Add another graduated filter for the grass. Increased exposure by one stop, increased contrast, brought highlights down and shadows up, increased whites, and so on. Adjustment brushes, center of the sky, increase temperature using the luminosity range mask. With the wooden post and rock island on that middle right-hand side, increased exposure slightly with the brush, increased highlights and shadows. Oh, how rude. My phone rings right when I'm in the middle. Let's see. Water, decreased highlights, increased shadows and whites, decreased blacks, and so on. She really, thank you, Keira, gave me a lot of detail what she did, but the bottom line is the image is beautiful. Very well done. The next image is from Jerry Williams, processed all Lightroom, sharpened in Photoshop with the high pass filter, then cropped the image, and then brushed in a warmer temperature in Lightroom over the clouds with reflected sun and over grass to emphasize that sunlight was coming from behind you. Very nicely done. This next one is from J.K. Evans. Let's see. Use content to where I think that means they used Photoshop. Content aware to delete the far left post. Added a LUT and a gradient fill radial for color in the sky. Did some dodging and burning. Sharpened in Topaz Studio. And then added a vignette. Very nicely done. This next one is from John Nicholson. Let's see. Use Topaz Labs, resized in AI Gigapixel. Normal map created with MindText 2. Topaz Labs AI Clear, then a Topaz Labs basic adjustment for white balance. Topaz Labs Precise Contrast. Then Topaz Labs Normal Map Overlay at 63%. Topaz Labs Lens Effects Gold Reflector on the bottom half. And then iMerge Pro Color Toning. Very cool, very neat rendition of the scene. Next one is Neil Bello. Let's see. Tried to do some effects on one to get the mood, but in color. And after cropping and then using a color enhancer filter and local adjustment brush to get some moodiness to the clouds, he found his computer didn't have enough memory or speed to complete the job, so I switched to Lightroom Classic. Unfortunately, I'm finding a lot of people are running into these problems. These graphics programs, all of them, from Lightroom to On1 to Luminar and all of them, they use so much computer resources that if your computer really isn't newer or really have a faster processor or enough RAM, it tends to crash and cause a lot of issues. And it really is a drag when you spend so much time processing an image and then your computer crashes. So I feel for you, Neil. I'm sorry about that. After cropping to get rid of the trees, so he brought it into the Lightroom Classic. Forgot if I mentioned that. He cropping to get rid of the trees on the right, excess stuff on the left. He tried some brushes to bring down the exposure in the grass and the gradient tool to increase darkness in the clouds. And after doing this, he decided to do fine as black and white, so he changed it to black and white. And he mentions he's going to be getting a new computer soon, so very good. Nicely done, Neil. This next image is from John Benedict, and this is our last image. Let's see, used On1 Photo Raw 2019 to process the image, used a local adjustment to darken the sky and make it a little more dramatic, and cropped it to a 16:9 format. Used two color enhancement filters, one for the sky and one for the grass in the foreground. Added a sunshine filter and some dynamic contrast to the sky only. Then he finished it off with the Big Softy vignette, probably the most popular vignette in On1 Photo Raw 2019. And it looks really cool. Nicely done, John. So thank you, everyone that has sent me your images, and thanks to the last batch of 20 that I've received. And again, I don't have another image on my computer. So if you sent it and I didn't cover it in episode 1A, B, C, D, or this episode, that means I didn't get it or I lost it. So please send it again. You have till tomorrow, and we'll be doing another video and wrapping this up. And then on Sunday, I'm going to introduce a new image that we're going to be doing, and I'll be changing the rules slightly, and I mentioned what we'll be doing going forward, where I'm not going to go over every single image anymore. But we'll cover that Sunday, and I'll talk to you about what we're going to be doing then. But I'd like to thank everyone that's participated in this. This has been a lot of fun. I know I've learned a lot so far, and I hope you have too. Thank you, everyone that watches my videos. I truly do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.